Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back as we look at descending motor pathways. We will have a conversation about the different pathways within the descending tracts and see how they influence movement, which types of muscles and what kind of movement they influence. It is also crucial to understand the anatomy on how these pathways are structured. So the descending pathways, we can start with what are called the lateral pathways for voluntary distal limb movement. So when you look at the illustration in the slide here, you'll be able to see that what we are looking at is the transverse section of the spinal cord that illustrates the different pathways. And you'll see those in a darker color, which are located on the lateral aspects of the spinal cord, and so they are called lateral pathways. And those ones that are in the anterior side or aspect of the spinal cord and closer to the midline of the spinal cord, they are called ventral medial pathways. So these are names related mostly to the anatomical positioning of these pathways as they traverse up and down the spinal cord. The pathways are also named according to the projection of the neurons and the direction of impulses. So you look at the corticospinal tracts within the lateral pathways. This implies that the neurons originate from the cortex and project to the spinal cord. So they will be called corticospinal tracts. Then we also have within there the rubrospinal, meaning projecting from the nucleus rubra or the red nucleus towards the spinal cord. Then we also have from the ventral medial pathways. You can see the names related to where they originate from, which nuclei they originate from, and to where they are projecting. And mostly you'll see they will be projecting the spinal cord to go and innervate or influence the anterior horn of the spinal cord, where the cell bodies of the lower motor neuron are located. So the lateral pathways, primarily the lateral corticospinal tract, are very, very important. In terms of function, they are under direct control of the cerebral cortex and are important in voluntary movement of the distal portions of the limbs, the legs and the arms. They originate where, as the name suggests, corticospinal, meaning originates from the primary motor cortex, but they also decussate. We've discussed what decussation means. They change their orientation from one side of the body into the other side of the body at the level of the medulla, leading to innervation of the contralateral motor neuron. So the corticospinal tracts, because they decussate, the corticospinal tracts on the right side of the body will innervate the structures on the left side of the body. That's what it means, contralateral. How do these project the pathways for pyramidal axons? So the corticospinal tracts are also called pyramidal pathways, and we are going to see, because this name originates from two issues. One, it is because of their decussation, so they make pyramid looking like structures within the brainstem as they decussate. But also because they originate from the primary motor cortex, from very large neurons that have a shape of pyramids. They are also called pyramidal tracts as a result. So two reasons. So corticospinal tracts axons are grouped together and form the medullary pyramids. And so what we see is that 80% of these will decussate to the other side, where in the medulla, at the junction of the medulla and spinal cord. These axons from the lateral, they form the lateral corticospinal tracts, as we've mentioned. Quickly also to highlight that the lateral corticospinal tract innervate contralateral, okay? And interneurons contralateral interneurons and motor neurons supplying the distal limb muscles. Continue with pathways. So what we see is that we will have from the cerebral cortex, we will have these corticospinal tracts passing through the internal capsule, coming downwards after the corpus callosum. Also there, they project downwards. And in the neck, in the junction between the spinal cord and the medulla, they cross, 80% of them cross to the other side. So this crossing creates pyramids. So this is what you see here, where the projection from one side and from the other side, crossing from one side of the body to the other, creates what look like pyramids. Yeah, also it is crucial to understand that from the sensory system, we discussed that the brain is able to tell where the sense is originating from, the source of the stimulus, which part of the body is stimulated, because each of the body parts has a particular part of the cerebral cortex where they transmit their impulses. Same applies to the motor activity. Each part of the body has axons that project downwards to go and control those groups of muscles. We can see the distal arms are somewhere towards the parietal areas, there towards almost parietal areas. On the lateral aspects this side, we see the mouth, the nose, and all those facial muscles and things like that. So the motor activity is mapped on the brain just as sensory activity is mapped on the brain. On the left side of this, on the right side of this slide, also what you are seeing is how the pyramids look like in the brainstem. Let's look at the ventromedial pathways or the extrapyramidal pathways, the pathways other than the pyramidal pathways. So the ventromedial pyramidal pathways, they are important for control of posture and locomotion. So what we see is that these pathways will arise from the brainstem, from those various nuclei, the red nucleus, the pontine nuclei, the tectospinal, and all those. They arise from the brainstem and manage posture and locomotion, as we have mentioned. They control trunk muscles and also the proximal muscles, because the distal muscles are under the corticospinal control. They function through extramedial tracts, which consist tracts such as the reticulospinal, vestibulospinal, tectospinal as examples. And if you remember the naming, we said these tracts originate from the reticular nucleus, this one from the vestibular nucleus, this one from the tecta. So because of this, they will be respectively called reticulospinal, vestibulospinal, and tectospinal, because they project to the spinal cord lower motor neurons. So what would be the overview of pyramidal and extrapyramidal? We are saying pyramidal tracts arise from the primary motor cortex and project downwards, direct to the spinal cord, controlling distal muscles without stopping or synapsing with any other neuron. They decussate in the medulla, and the extrapyramidal tracts originate from the brainstem and basal ganglia, and these, they regulate posture and voluntary movement of the trunk and proximal muscles. Let's look at the extrapyramidal components. So we've mentioned the rubrospinal. What's the origin? What's the input? What's the output? The rubrospinal originates from the red nucleus in the brain, midbrain, and receives input from the cerebellum and motor cortex. It crosses to the contralateral side as it projects downwards, meaning to control muscles on the opposite side for a setting distal limb movement, then excites flexor muscles while inhibiting extensors, also regulating tone and posture. You can see in the illustration here, there is something that looks like the ear, and so we are talking about control of posture and balance, and also the fact that the middle ear is involved in control of balance. So the vestibular spinal tracts involved in muscle tone, regulation, and balance. They arise from the vestibular nucleus in the pons and the medulla, and receives input from the inner ear and the cerebellum. That is why you notice some of the ear infections actually affect balance, because the middle ear is involved in balance control through the same circular canals. The tract remains ipsilateral, so this one is controlling on the same side. And what muscles will be affected? It will excite extensors while inhibiting flexors compared to the other one we've discussed. Then it maintains muscle tone for balance in response to head movements. The tracheospinal and tectospinal tracts, they control posture and head movement. So we are talking about those tracts originating from the brainstem reticular formation. And the reticular formation, this is like a meshwork of neurons within the brainstem that are called the reticular formation. They are involved in so many physiological activities, including breathing, including control of sleep, including respiratory activity, temperature regulation, a lot of them. The pontine tracts excite axial extensors, while those that are within the medulla, they inhibit them. The tectospinal tracts begin in the superior colliculus of the midbrain, and these they mediate head and eye movement in response to visual stimulus. So we will also have a look at the subcortical structures like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, and that will be the end for this series of motor control activities. Then we'll also end looking at the neuromuscular junction. So I'll see you in the next lecture.